Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Digital Artcast. This one dropping hot again, making sure that I'm getting plenty of episodes out in this short time when people are spending most of their time in home or working from home. Wherever you guys are, I hope you're staying safe and making sure that you're making the best of this time. I know it can be troubling. It's a very strange time for everybody, including what's going on in America just now. So again, I hope all you guys are safe and looking after yourself, and I'm glad that you came back to listen to another episode. These podcasts now have been going on for just about 4 years. I think we're nearly on our 4-year anniversary mark, which is really great. Hitting up 2,500 subscribers at this point, and many listeners all over the globe. And again, there's a small hit list that I've always had next to my computer, looking at people that I really want on the podcast, I really wanted to talk to. We've had some great guests on here, like Scott Robertson, Corey Elphis, a couple of other people that we've wanted to get on and we've had on. But today we've got another one of those what I would call AAA big hitters, or people that I've kind of looked up to in the concept art world and entertainment art world for a while. So please today help me in welcoming our guest on the show. That is Mr. Shaddy Safadi.
Hey, Shaddy, how's it going?
Yeah, good man, good. I hope I gave you the intro that was worthy of your title.
Yes.
So.
Well, to me, I'm just a person, so.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
right.
the humble brag's out already.
Like I was friends with the game director of Last of Us 2, Neil Druckmann. I remember we were working together in Naughty Dog, and back when we were working together, he was just a person too.
Right. Yeah, of course. And now he's like superstar supreme. So. Yeah, I can't go down the street without getting mobbed and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it was actually, was really surprising. Just quickly off on a side note, was just watching his social media over the last couple of weeks take an absolute horrible turn when he was reposting a couple of different tweets and stuff, and it was kind of, and then obviously with The Last of Us, a lot of people know about the whole leak thing. So it's been a weird situation probably for him on his side as well, with being so famous or having such an accolade next to his name, because now he's more in the spotlight than ever. But I think for a lot of creatives, you kind of want to recoil most of the time in the world. You just want to have your own safe space. But I feel with social media that sometimes that veil is dropped and that you're exposed even more now.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I know it's been tough for him. I talked to him about it, and also when you put your heart and soul into something, even when you put your heart and soul into a piece of art that took you 4 days. Right. Imagine you spent 4 days on something and you sent it to one person that you trusted and respected, and that person said, "I hate you." Not just I don't like this. I also hate you personally.
Yeah,
that's how much I hate this. I also hate you.
It's good to be trying. So yeah.
So I also think I was joking around with him, jokingly saying that when that first happened that he got Benioffed, but he's going to recover. I just want to put this out there right now. I loved the last season of Game of Thrones. I just want everyone to take everything I say after this into consideration. Like temper, because every opinion I have could be wrong, because I enjoyed season 8 of Game of Thrones. I agree with people's critiques, some of them, and I wish they had done those things, but I didn't not enjoy the show. And I think that actually is a thing I try to hold on to, is like when you experience a thing, you have an emotional reaction. Right. And just because someone else says, I didn't like it, sometimes you adjust your experience retroactively to coincide with what popular opinion is, because you don't want to be an outcast and you don't want to feel stupid. So a lot of times people might say, well, I actually really like Transformers, and they do it in that whispery tone because they feel guilty. They don't want anyone to know. Or like, I thought Pacific Rim was fun. Like it was, that movie was really tongue in cheek and kind of over the top. I think Avatar was one of my favorite movies I've ever seen. Yeah, I agree with you. Some of the bad guys were a little bit one-sided, but like, there's things like that where I think you have to just kind of go with your first experience that you personally had and then stick to it. And so, I think it was a little bit of a struggle, but I also was joking with him saying that when the reviews came out, he would rise like a phoenix from the ashes, and thankfully that's what happened. So not that reviews are everything. Obviously a lot of things get fantastic reviews. I sometimes, to make myself feel better, read like the 2 bad reviews of Shawshank Redemption. You can you can go on Rotten Tomatoes and read like a scathing review of Shawshank Redemption, and you're like, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
and
fair enough.
it got good reviews at the time, but there's some people that thought they didn't like it. And I found the best way to insult any medium is to just say what happened, but with a sarcastic voice. You could be like, "Oh, so one guy's in prison, but he's falsely accused, and then he escapes." If you just say it in that voice, then it just sounds dumb. But it's real easy to crap on people trying to make art, they're just their hardest to make great things. So I have very, very little respect, relatively, for people whose profession it is to shit on other people's art, who don't do it professionally.
Yes.
If you want to, amongst your friends, talk about the ins and outs and the particulars of what you didn't like about something that is really AAA because you're trying to grow yourself and grow the medium. But someone whose job it is to just talk about what they like and didn't like, reminds me of Ratatouille. When Ego was saying that even the average piece of junk is probably worth more than the review designating it so. And I thought that was a really profound part of that movie because, yeah, I completely agree. And so I think in this case of this game, everyone's going to have to sit down and play it for themselves. And maybe some people will love it. And because the reviews create a social momentum, that's the good thing about reviews, is they've created a social momentum. So for me, career-wise, because we did so much art on it, it's going to be considered good no matter what in any individual. It's past the point of no return, right? It's not going to happen where like people play it and think, oh, but this is actually terrible. It got a 96 Metacritic. It's a successful game. It's going to sell a crap load of copies. But there certainly might be people that are like, ooh, it was tough to get through, or it was too bleak, or this and that. But that's what I love about Neil. He's just like, he's always kind of wanted to tell the kind of dark stories that he wants to tell. And Bruce, too. Don't forget, like the first game was Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann. Those guys, they co-created that game, the first one. They co-wrote the story. They developed all the gameplay, and they kind of made that IP what it is. So I'm really excited to sit down and play this next one, and I'm really stoked that the reviews came in and generally people thought it was good.
Yeah, I mean, in general, when I think you create anything that takes a part of you with you on that journey, that when you put it out there to be judged, you do feel like you yourself are being judged. I mean, I know I have watched the original Last of Us documentary that Sony done on the making of the first game and really got involved in how because I love watching making of stuff. But then more recently I watched Corey and his team in Santa Monica, the making of, the Raising Kratos documentary about how they basically went through the whole thing of making the new God of War. So you never really, I think probably most gamers should watch all of these documentaries and really see the amount of personality that goes into these whole productions that take 4 or 5 years. I mean, it seems like such a small number now, and really, in the grand scale, it isn't. But 5 years of your life is a lot of time. You go from 30 to 35, from 35 to 40. So, for some people, it's like a career-defining, a life-defining moment. And I think if there's any negativity injected in that, it can almost tear you down piece by piece as a person.
And imagine if you worked for 5 years on something that wasn't considered the greatest game ever, or failed critically. Imagine how hard that would be. And I've been lucky to be a Naughty Dog, and they make great games. But early in my career, I worked on a game. My first game that I worked on was called Neopets, and it was based on, it was like Pokemon, but it was like these little cartoon character things. And that game came out. I worked on it for a year and a half, and didn't sell, and a lot of people got fired. Imagine, for all that crunch and for all that work, your reward was getting fired.
I know, which is
high stakes game.
Yeah, I think it's why a lot of people now aim for freelance because, I mean, for me personally, when I wanted to, back in 2016, when I was going to my first couple of events and, about to graduate and looking at different things, the game industry always seemed like, when you watch like the Halo documentaries I did back in the day, or, some of the Double Fine stuff, the guys, Tim Schafer and that you looked at games as like a fun time, something that was really interesting. And then talking on Double Fine specifically, their studio went through so much heartbreak. Oh my God, I'm surprised Tim isn't like 5 times his age, but you look at how much heartbreak some studios take when, games get cancelled. And then even at the start of the God of War documentary, the whole, I think, first 20 minutes is about how they built this team for the sci-fi game that was getting made, and then like from nowhere it was just dead, it was gone. And then obviously the rest of the guys putting it into God of War, but then of course that dream was dead. Whoever was building that dream, it was gone and never coming back. So I think for me the game industry sometimes, and to an extent the film industry, seem like, I don't know. Do you feel this is a really I'm asking this question because you're a hardened professional at this point, but do you feel like the games industry has changed significantly, or has it always stayed the same? Like, especially for people coming in fresh faced, do you feel like there's a huge reality check that people miss?
I think, well, now I think that it's just games cost more. So they cost a lot more and they take a lot more time. So they have less opportunity to take risk. But at the same time, I don't know if this is true because I work mostly in like, big budget AAA space, but I would guess because of the Apple games, I don't know if you guys, if you've played them, but like on Apple TV, you can subscribe and then you have access to all these cool, fun, a lot of really fun, interesting games. Quite a few I played actually on my Apple TV using the Apple TV remote. Plus there's phone games, which actually I play more games on my phone, definitely not on the toilet while pooping, but I play more games on my phone than I do on my PlayStation 4. The PlayStation 4 the dust gets blown off of it when it's time to sit down and get through a full on thing. But Apple TV games, I think phone games and also because the technology, the 3D technology, because of Unreal, because of Unity, has made making games so much easier that I think there's a lot of space, more space, I would guess now, to make smaller, fun games if you're really about the game play. Yeah. But here's the tricky thing about games. We all know movies are about story. That's the point. But games, it's kind of clearing up now, but games can be about a few different things. And I think 15 years ago, the idea of having a story in games, I remember seeing some talks at GDC that said, well, that's not what games are. Some big name people saying that's not what games are. Games are about gameplay. Well, we found out that that's not true. That games can be both. They can have. It doesn't have to be. Doesn't have to be either one or the other. And I remember something Bruce told me. Bruce Straley, the game director at the time, is that when they were first coming up with the idea for The Last of Us, because I was there, I was still at Naughty Dog when that idea first came on, and I remember him saying that the zombie genre had been done quite a bit, and there had been Children of Men and World War Z, and it wasn't like zombie genre was new even then. Like it was old news even 10 years ago. It was old news. But he said if it's new for games, it's new. And what they were trying to do is when they were breaking out the story, and this is just them telling me, is they sit in a room and they look at all the beats the same way you would in a movie. And I don't know how familiar your listeners are or you are with how a story is traditionally written according to the Robert McKee story structure. He has a book called Story that kind of outlines it. But roughly they were kind of following that idea, which is you have 3 acts and you have a bunch of cards you put up on the wall of all these moments that you want. And then you figure out what the arcs of the characters are going to be from beginning to end. They start off this way, and they're going to end up this way. And one of the important aspects of that is the characters and the interactions that they meet along the way are going to be telling different sides of the lesson that they're going to learn. So in Last of Us 1, Joel and Ellie Joel had to learn to care about someone again, because no spoilers, but we're going to spoil Last of Us 1. It's too late. You haven't played it. It's been long enough. The beginning of Last of Us 1, Joel's daughter dies. So Ellie becomes his sort of makeshift daughter. Well, he's got to learn to love again. He's got to learn to care. And then at the end of the game, he has to realize that what's more important, the life of one person that I love, or the life of many. And there were people that they met along the way, like Sam, if you remember, this was like a couple characters they met along the way, where their relationship of love was so intense that when it went wrong, one of the characters, killed themselves. So it was like, your point is to try to make all these moments along the way help tell the greater story. But that's one aspect of it. That's the writing part. But then what they were also trying to do is to put it on the stick, they used to say. So put it on the stick, mean on the PlayStation joystick. Like, how do you make story moments happen while you're playing? So if you're trying to develop a relationship between 2 characters, you want Ellie to suddenly be useful within the game. Like, you're trying to climb somewhere and she says, oh, I think there's a ladder over here. And then you as a player feel, oh, thank you, NPC. it's technically an NPC, but you're grateful to the NPC, and you start to have that feeling. So they were kind of pioneers. It'd been done before, but never so concertedly, never so focused. We're going to try to put gameplay and story in together so that gameplay moments match the story. You can't be mad at Ellie if the cutscene after is you guys hugging.
Right.
And then at the same time, they built it using traditional storytelling techniques about how character arcs work and stuff. So I think those two things made the first one. They took and they were still we all went too, but they were still going to Robert McKee workshops. They were reading storybooks for the first time. When Neil and Bruce started, they were learning story the way anyone would by looking at books from the guys who were the most famous at it. And then the first one became what it was. But also it has to do with, I think, their particular taste. Because I think in video games in general, the people who've been making games for a long time, we're all like kids, you know. It's an industry run by kids, by 14-year-olds who are really into this. They're like, yeah, and now it's 30 years later, and they're in charge. But it was cool to have some fresh thinking come in, like Neil's sensibility for what makes a good story. Allowed them to have an ending of The Last of Us 1, which I'm going to spoil, is that, Joel at the end decides not to, have Ellie be killed in order, because she had the cure in her body, but the only way they were going to get the cure out was to kill her. He decided not to, and then he lied to her about it. So it ended on this bittersweet moment. Well, that's a sensibility, taste, really subtle thing that, like, that artist, those writers, Neil and Bruce, they liked that. They decided to go with that. The audience ended up liking it. But that's a rare thing for games, to bring that kind of nuance into it. I think part of the reason that was possible, I think part of the reason Last of Us 1 was possible, is structurally the way Naughty Dog was built, and because of the history they've had. So they had Crash Bandicoot, right? Did great. They had Jak and Daxter, did great. I think somewhere around Jak 2, they got bought out by Sony. It was Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin. And once they got bought out, Sony was in charge, but Sony let them sort of do their thing, like figure out the games they wanted to make. And from within Naughty Dog, Amy Hennig came up with, everyone was talking ideas, but she helped come up with the idea of Uncharted, the idea of like a modern Indiana Jones. And that game was a hit. And then Uncharted 2 came out, and it was a huge hit. And Neil and Bruce had a huge hand in Uncharted 2. That's when they kind of built their sort of storytelling chops along with Amy. But and then Uncharted 3 was a huge hit. And so there was hit after hit of the studio kind of making their own thing. And so when they were looking for a new IP, and Neil had this one-page pitch that he gave to people, and it was really powerful because he had read some books about how to pitch, I'm sure, and he had this one-pager that described these moments. And I remember because he pitched it to me too. He got us in rooms and pitched it. He pitched it to the president, co-presidents at the time, Evan Wells and Christoph, and they liked it. And they liked it enough to try it out. So that's kind of amazing for someone to just work somewhere, because keep in mind, he just worked there. He wasn't like a high up person, but he was dedicated. He worked really hard from within the company. You had a company structure that allowed for that sort of thing, which is pretty unusual for someone from just within the company to be like, I have this idea. You have Sony, who was smart enough and hands off enough to be like, yeah, guys, what you got? What do you think? What do you think? And you got Evan and Christoph, who knew that maybe this could be something that could potentially make money too, because they have to be concerned about that. Like, is this game have a market? Can it work? And all along the way, they kind of let people who were not necessarily the highest up people have a shot. And that's always been a culture thing there. I'm not there anymore, but like I know the culture was like that. Is that if you're good, if you have a good idea, your idea can rise to the surface if you're good enough. I mean, you have to power through. I'm sure there was a lot of battles going on the whole time, but that's a really awesome feature about that company. Now, I do freelance now for a lot of AAA studios, and that's not how they're all set up. Most AAA studios are run by daddy publisher to some degree. Daddy publisher, here's the idea, decides based on market what it can do and what it can't do. But not all studios have this sort of so much trust in the storytellers and so much trust in the creators. And part of that reason is because you should trust them. Like Neil and Bruce at the time, they know a fucking lot. Like I've been. By the way, can we swear on this thing?
Oh yeah, fuck
okay,
yeah.
Okay. I've been on the butt end. Bruce and I work together quite a bit now because he's working on his own. He's working on some cool stuff. But back when I worked there, I was on the ass end of some like tough feedback, some tough critiques. But I don't think I ever felt like those guys didn't know what they were doing. Even when I was upset, even when I was like, "Damn it," they're like busting my ass. I never felt like I didn't trust their judgment. And I think that's a general feeling. Now, that also is just a stroke of luck, partly because Naughty Dog lets good people rise, but also partly because those guys just happen to really know what they're talking about. Now, someone else could not as much, and then the game is going to show it, you know? So just a really lot of things have to align to allow something like The Last of Us 1 to happen. And now it's a little bit more proven. So Last of Us 2, thank goodness, it was proven to be a decent, awesome game, and reviewers liked it. And I'm sure the 2 is going to be awesome too. But they've been proving themselves so many times that I don't think they're going to get checked by anyone until they make a game that doesn't do well. And then Sony's going to come in and start, flexing. But until that happens, they're going to be left to make their own awesome stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a very intense operation over a couple of years, and I think given that level of trust is hard to get from a high level. I mean, I know, here close by is Edinburgh, and in Edinburgh, and the beating heart of the city is Rockstar North, and they guys are responsible for Grand Theft Auto, and they basically get left to their own devices now because they spent so many years crunching and working really hard and putting out those awesome games. And now, of course, whatever they're doing, but the publishers they work with are the guys who are investors are very happy to just let them do whatever they want to do because they have such a legacy. So I can totally understand where Naughty Dog have came from because, and side note, by the way, Amy Hennig is one of my all-time, I'm just a fanboy for her work. I mean, back in the day when she was writing Legacy of Kain series with Crystal Dynamics, like that was my shit for a long time. Oh yeah, like that. I was just, we were talking about story, but like I was going to say, when we play these games, or I played these games growing up, I was never thinking about, that jump mechanic was really good and it stayed with me for a long time. No, it was the stories, like Amy's stories and Soul Reaver, like those were the things that I grew up around, and other stories of that caliber at the time when games were just becoming a thing, that was the things that stuck with me. And of course The Last of Us, phenomenal. Just even watching Troy and Nolan North and stuff play it recently on their channel, and watching them revisit that first 15 minutes was like harrowing, because I knew how I felt the first time I watched it. I was in tears, but yeah, like seeing them revisit that stuff, the stories, they do stay with you forever. And I think that's almost a good transition into just how pieces of art can stay with you as well, because I think looking back at the first Last of Us, especially, even Uncharted, and and again, I'm a long time Jack and Daxter fan. I'm still waiting for them to reboot that. Please God do. I just saw I was sitting watching the Sony review, and I saw the Ratchet and Clank new game from Insomniac. I was like, oh, thank God, because Ratchet and Clank and Jack and Daxter are like some of my two favorite game franchises of all time, next to maybe like The Legend and Zelda. But yeah, so watching all that stuff happen again has been great. But then I think talking about pieces of art that stay with you, I mean, I know some of my first art books were things from Uncharted and the original Last of Us, and I was really lucky that I got to meet Troy, who voiced Joel at an event, and he got to sign my book. And when I told him at the time I was trying to be a concept artist, he actually sat for a whole extra 5 minutes, and there's a queue behind me, but he flicked through the pages of the book, and he was like, I got this sketch really early on from the concept art team, and it really gave him, and it was a picture, like a sketch of Joel and Ellie sitting at a fireside, kind of eating something, and they were like, I think one of them might have been playing guitar. They were laughing between each other.
Yeah, Young did that sketch, I think.
Yeah, so he was like really enamored that I was trying for this, and he's like, yeah, you guys are the real storytellers. You guys really you set the tone for the whole thing, and this sketch really gave me so much to work with, and it was really incredible to see his eyes light up when I mentioned concept art, because it had such a powerful impact on him as an actor. So. I think, yeah. So a little snippet for you there, because I met him in an event in Scotland, and when I said that, he went through the book and was really interested to have this conversation with me. But for you as an artist, do you think that's why One Pixel Brush was kind of born? Did you feel like storytelling lived in those pictures as well as the game?
Well, I always loved concept art from the beginning, because it was the funnest on paper job, because you just get to do the fun stuff. You get to like make the one image and then give it to them, and then you don't have to do anything else. So right. in some ways, it's kind of the easiest.
Right.
It's the most competitive. It's the most sexy, and so it's the hardest in that way. But once you're doing it, like for example, deadlines don't, they apply to us, but it's not like the game is going to ship or not ship because they received the concept art. It's not like, even when I was at Naughty Dog, I found things to crunch on. Like I was crunching because they had me do skyboxes, do the textures for skyboxes. But inherently, concept art is the beginning of the process, so that's one thing that's really awesome about it. I of course always try to we always try to put a character in the shot so that there's some kind of awesome storytelling moment, even if the character in the shot is just like 90% of our images are just like the character with their back to us, back to the camera, walking into the frame. That's enough. It's just person arrived is the story, or person explores. That's what I mean by story, just like something super simple. So yeah, absolutely, the storytelling element is fun and important. And also, I will say, you kind of have to fight for it, because there is an element of concept art that is like, we did a lot of black and white rough sketches for the 3D artists that just show where the objects are, where the things are. But it's also fun to do finished pieces, It's fun. It's also expensive, and it's also time consuming. So the fact that Naughty Dog had the time and the budget to commission, 860 like relatively finished, maybe 750 are like realistic key art looking images, and then like 100 are black and white. But that's a lot of concept art.
That's a lot, yeah. I was going to say, that's a lot of concept art.
Yeah, and it was because, John Sweeney was the art director, and he's a concept artist, so he believed in concept art. And a lot of times we would just blue sky different areas. But yeah, it was always really fun to think about making the art for things. But I will say this too: the artists at One Pixel Brush are the ones that are doing the art. I'm exchanging emails. That's my job on this thing. So for me, the IP that we're working on, what we're actually doing, is matters less to me. What I started 2 years ago was writing, because I got into I was kind of inspired by what Neil and Bruce did, and Bruce left Naughty Dog, and I pitched him an animated movie idea, and we workshopped.
Oh yeah, your animated movie, yeah.
Yeah, we workshopped it every day. Not every day, but we met once a week, and we workshopped it and went through the exact same process that he did with Neil, helping to shape up this story. Because I wanted to learn too. I thought that's really cool that he did that, and I almost felt like bad that I hadn't gotten after it sooner, that I was only in the art. But I had to learn this new craft from zero, and and now when concept artists are starting out and they're struggling and they're like, how do I break in? I feel you, because I'm at the bottom of another mountain,
Right.
And it's a really hard thing to say, okay, I'm king of the hill over here, but I'm going to climb all the way down, and I'm going to start back on square one on a brand new whole thing, assuming writing is a whole new art form, which it completely is, and just hammer away on it and get ready to take abuse instead of applause. Because if I right now, you might go to a GDC and people are like, oh, you're a concept artist, that's great, and I know you and all that. But as a writer, I'm nobody, right? I'm zero. But enough people that I pitched it to, who were the closest experts that I could get my hands on, which happened to be Bruce at the time, gave me great feedback, and I ended up getting to pitch it to DreamWorks, like the vice president of DreamWorks. I pitched it to the heads of Illumination development, and I pitched it to the president of development at Netflix. So I got these like insane, huge meetings, having never pitched anything before, partly because I had vetted it through many layers of the best experts I could get my hands on at the time. Let someone, and writing is annoying because when you give it to someone, they have to read it. So even though it's a 15-page treatment, you're burdening them. It takes a lot more time than just looking at piece of art and saying yay or nay. But that's the process of climbing kind of from scratch. And people saying, like, I like it, but no thank you. What else? And I'm like, okay, cool. So I'm just going to keep powering away on this thing. And so for young artists that are starting out, because I'm kind of back at square one on this other thing, I'll say you kind of have to, one of the things that really helped me was deciding, as I started, I was like, I'm going to do this writing thing, storytelling thing, till I'm dead. And that's what's going to happen next. So either I'm going to die and having made something that's cool, or I'm going to die having made a bunch of shit that I thought was cool that nobody else saw. And so there was no option to give up. There was just an option of like, I'm going to use all my spare time for the rest of my time on Earth to do this thing. And I think that's a really important attitude for starting concept artists. The number 1-2 thing I think that is good to consider is that you have to kind of find some mentors. and whoever the best, closest people you can get your hands on that will respond to your emails and respond to your Facebook messages. I sometimes get a lot of messages, not a ton, but one every couple of days about a portfolio. Sometimes I file them away in folders. I get back to very few people, but I'm responding to emails all day for hours doing that. So sometimes I just don't get back to stuff. So, but what I would recommend is you don't want to send something to me. You want to send something to like a one pixel brush artist, right?
Right.
You want to send something to the guys. First of all, they know more than me. They're better than me at art, and they aren't as getting as much, people sending them stuff. So that's kind of my philosophy with writing is like, I'm going to talk to writers who work in TV or writers who work in these different fields or any writer that I know. I'm not going to like send my script to Steven Spielberg, and I'm not comparing myself to Steven Spielberg, but I'm not going to send it to him and be like, hey, what do you think? Because I'm disrespecting his time at the moment. And I'm not saying people are doing that when they send it to me. I'm just saying send it to the people who are around you, who are the best people you know, and the experts that are not a big name necessarily, but you love their stuff.
Yeah.
So if you go on ArtStation, as soon as all this concept art drops, you're going to see a lot of artists' names. I posted a couple days ago about, I listed all the artists who worked on it. And you can Google any one of them, look at their ArtStation, see what they've done. And the ones you think are good, you should message them and see if they can start a relationship with you, giving you feedback. Another thing I would say is you should only send stuff too that you think is like really pretty good too. That helps because you send it after you've already gotten it to the point where you think it's good. That's the best time for someone else to say it sucks.
Right.
If you already think that there's lots of problems with a thing, it's harder to get feedback from someone else. It's way easier. I only send things I'm proud of, and then I have it shit on. And by the way, with art too, I send my art all the time to Eitan, to my girlfriend. I send it to Bruce. I send it to different people in the early comp stage just to see what their thoughts are, and they do this.
But then, of course, you're also in the position where you've already climbed that mountain and being good at art because you got a job at Naughty Dog, right? So you've already got to a point now where your art, and for however, because you're obviously doing AD stuff now, you're emailing, you're working with clients. So is that something that you miss doing, particularly as being in the field and doing the art side of it as well? Or
art directing sucks. It sucks. It's just more lucrative, so that's capitalism.
Right. Okay. Talk to Sweeney about that one then.
What's that?
Talk that to Sweeney about that one. How art direction sucks. I'm sure he'll agree with you.
I mean, his is a lot harder. Well, and it's inspiring to help people, and it's inspiring to watch them get better, but not that inspiring. It's way more fun to do art.
Yeah.
I know some people could say, I just love watching other people coaching. Coaching is great because I get to watch other people play the game. I like playing the game. But I spend a good amount of my day doing art, especially in the past since this year started. I decided I'm going to get as good, at least, as an average one pixel brush artist. I want to be good enough to be hired by me, which I'm not right now. So this beginning of this year, I really dived in and started digging into all the software that I needed to learn. And that included Blender. I learned Marvelous Designer. I got Substance Painter and 3D Coat on the horizon here in the next month or so. But this year I put a pause on everything. I have another story that I'm ready to start pitching, and I have all those connections, but I'm like, I want to actually do art. So I'm creating just every day. I'm spending a good amount of time getting back into art, and absolutely that's the most fun. That's the most fun thing. It's way more fun than art directing. Art directing is nice, and that is a little bit of a problem in anyone's profession. You get better at a thing that you're really good at, and then you get promoted. And now your job is to tell other people how to do it. But you there's a beauty. I remember at Naughty Dog, there was a programmer who got promoted to president, and he didn't like it, and he left. He wanted to be a programmer, so he just stepped down. Yeah. So for some people, it's not their thing. I remember I mentioned it to Neil because he's a co-president, but I thought he'd like, I was talking to him like, are you afraid that you're not going to be able to do like the writing and the gameplay? And if you become co-president, you're going to have all these other responsibilities, and I'm not sure that he'd be into that. And he was kind of implied that he's tired. He's like, no, I'm good. It's good. It's fine.
I mean, especially Naughty Dog, right? Because I mean, when you get to the tippity top, like when you're on that level, I mean, the same with some of the guys I know at Sony or Blizzard or Riot. When you're playing at that level constantly, I mean, there is just an inherent burnout I think you're gonna experience, because games are so intense to make, and they obviously they take years to make, but over those years you work some of the hardest you've ever worked in your entire life. I mean, I know for some studios they have a whole 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, don't work weekends, don't work overtime, but which I think is more in animation than it is games. But with games, you know, people sometimes go flat out for like 2 solid years, and then at the end of it they're like, oh, I just want to sit down, because you're standing up constantly. You know, you're always, especially with art directors and people who are running projects, because you're just jumping from one desk to the next, or one department and another meeting and a meeting's about, and then at one point all you're getting on is all days, it's just meetings all day, and you don't actually get time to do anything. So yeah, I think you're right in what you're saying. The art side of it is a good place to be, because then of course you're focusing on your craft, you're not worrying about outside forces. And I think that's also maybe a trap you fell into with One Pixel Brush, where it's great that you get to hone in this skill and these guys who are working on these amazing projects now, but again, you're at the epicenter of it, where you're answering emails and going back and forth for clients and speaking to people and giving direction. So is that, I mean, well, I don't know how much.
I'll say that, like, at Naughty Dog, working there and finishing a game is like storming the beach at D-Day. You know, like you're just watching people like scoop their own intestines back into their body. It's hell on earth. What we do, and I've made this analogy before, we're just like Black Ops Navy SEALs that get called in, drop in a helicopter, clear a building, and then we leave. And I love that. I love it because it's cool. I love it because it's not as much commitment. I love it because I'm sitting in a base running comms with my headset on, and it's now the caveat is those Black Ops guys have to be the best ever. Right. They can't be normal soldiers. They have to be like super soldiers. So the challenge in my world is to find these like incredible people, or find artists that are very good, but like what is the coaching they need to get them to like Black Ops SEAL Team 6? But our job is a little bit removed from the hell. And so someone like Eitan, who has been an artist there for a long time, he could easily be an art director too. But he doesn't want to, he didn't want to like be like punished, dealing with personalities, dealing with stuff. John Sweeney is like unbelievably good at, just working with him is so easy. He's humble, he's calm. Again, I'm seeing him from just like general talking to general. So I'm not there like for the day to day. I'm not on the beach. So I'm not seeing the shrapnel fly, but just in general, he just is, and he's good with people. He's not easily flustered. He's a chill dude. He's like incredibly good for that job, just from a personality perspective. So it's tough. And he misses his art too. I mean, he's doing art right now ever since the game slowed down in terms of like, got close to shipping. He's been furiously working on his own projects. He just posted an amazing painting that he did.
So good.
Yeah, and he's really excited about his own thing too. He didn't get to do a ton of art for Last of Us just because he was managing people. But the money's probably pretty good. So it's like a trade-off. You're like, what do I want? Do I want some more monies? And I think One Pixel Brush is a good balance for me, because I like running the studio is good, but what I like more than I'm not making a huge amount, but like I'm doing okay, is that I have freedom now. So if my girlfriend and I wanted to go to Hawaii and work from there, I don't have to ask for days off. And by the way, the contractors, the artists that I work with are the same. I had two artists last week being like, I'm going to go for a couple weeks. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll just figure it out. And they're like, yeah, because things just opened up, and I know I said I was going to be gone for a few days, but I kind of want to go like for like a couple of weeks. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can do whatever you want. You're all contractors, a lot of them, most of them. So, but also, and as a little bit of like, oh damn it, I wish I had this. I took this job because I expected this one particular artist to be around to work on it. So now they're not. So there's a easy instinct that I could have, and I think a lot of managers and art direct probably could have, and people that work in companies, where I should be like, well, you're not down for the company cause. Like, you really should stick around, and if you really cared about this project, or if you really believed in this, you would be here for this. But I just don't believe that. These are just fucking jobs. Like, it's cool, we like them, but at the end of the day, you have to live your life. And so I fundamentally believe that, which is why I kind of started this company, and I kind of believe that for artists. So if an artist says, I need to be gone for 2 months to figure out what my art should be and how I want to grow as an artist. I'm like, well, of course I get it. I'm annoyed a little bit because now I have to hire someone new or fill in the shoes or do some. They're making me do more work, so that's why I'm annoyed. But it's really like awesome that everyone feels free to do that, because this whole concept of I'm at a company and I have to stay there and then I die and I have a stack of discs to show for it is perfectly fine for some people. But when I left Naughty Dog, that was kind of the thing. I had this meeting with the presidents and they were like, "Why are you leaving?" And I said, "No reason. I don't want to come in anymore." And they were like, "Well, you're going to go somewhere for sure. You're going to take another job. Where are you going? You sure you got an offer or something?" I'm like, I guarantee you will never hear of me taking another job. The only place I'll ever come back to is Naughty Dog. Because I've seen, I've worked freelance for a lot of studios, and I can tell you, Naughty Dog is one of my favorite. I like the artists there. I like the attitude. I like the mentality. I like the kind of games they make. I was like, you won't hear of it. I did an interview at LucasArts, and they said, "See, you did an interview at LucasArts." I'm like, that was just an interview. I wasn't going to go to LucasArts to work in work in an office somewhere. So yeah, I think maybe COVID too has done a little bit to make people appreciate the fact that we don't all have to be, in the room. On this same schedule, trapped. Like, so what? You want to take 2 months off and not get paid? Who needs the extra money? What are you making the money for? To buy a slightly nicer car? Just buy a $15,000 car instead of a $30,000 car, and use that $15,000 to just take 2 months off of a year. The clock is ticking, and we're all going to die. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Yeah, I mean, like it's a bleak outlook, but I mean, I feel like that's what disillusioned me with the. I mean, when I left my job at 28 as an engineer to go back and be an artist, because it was like chasing my dream, I thought it would be no impossible or no relatively difficult, but I probably could get a job when I left. But then the fact that I've left and the end of 2018 and graduated, and I'm still I'm doing bits here and there, but yeah, it's a very difficult industry to land on, because I feel like when you go in as a studio, as even a junior now, like you have to hit the ground, not just running, but like sprinting the same speed as everybody else. And if you fall down, like, of course, people will try to pick you up, but then there's very little room for that. You talked about mentors earlier on. That's something I felt when I was an engineer, for example. When I first started my job, we had on-site job training. Like we were just given the job. We weren't engineers when we were picked. We were just given a job because they needed people to be engineers. And then throughout my time there, people trained me to be an engineer. They taught me, you press this button to do this thing, or this is, and then you learned, and then you became an engineer. But with games, I feel like there is no room for that at all. Even with mentors, you can obviously get feedback and stuff, but you could never walk into a job as a games artist not knowing how to paint, right? That would just never be done. So that's the difference I feel in this industry versus the place I came from. Is that your experience in the studios, especially when you were starting out? Is that
it gets harder and harder, and easier in some other ways. The ways it gets harder is that none of the artists that started working on even we did a concept test. Like, I had left obviously Naughty Dog, and then 3 years later they hired us back.
Right.
As they hired my team. But if you think about it, that's pretty silly, because all the people who work there know me as just some guy who used to work there. So, for imagine if you left your engineering job and then like 2 weeks later we're like, "Hey, I have a bunch of engineers here that you could hire, but you have to go through me." It'd be pretty stupid. So it took a little while for them to say, "Oh, okay, well, you've developed a team and maybe they're good and we'll give you a test." And then we did a bunch of concepts for them, like 8, to try it out. But we're competing against the best. You got Robbie Johnson there, and Aton, and all these amazing artists. And so we did this bunch of concepts, and I thought they were very good, and they thought they were very good, and they hired us. And and I didn't know how many. It could have been 20 images, it could have been 30. Ended up being 800, shockingly. But those images that we first delivered, I don't think any of those made the art book, and I don't think any of those artists would have quite been hired at One Pixel Brush right now. Like, if you showed me any of those first images just from 4 years ago, I'm not sure. They would have barely, maybe not quite. I would have had a lot of feedback. They would have barely not made the cut for today. So yeah, it's changing constantly. The industry is moving so fast. But I will say this: a lot of the ways that it's changing have gotten a little bit easier. In that, yes, it's a pain in the ass to learn Blender inside and out. It's a pain in the ass for sure. But once you have that tool, once you're kind of fluent in 3D, you have like an 80% block sort of how to do things kind of out of the way. The only thing I will add is that, yeah, there is a fundamental artistry that is besides the learning of 3D, because a lot of our concepts are done in 3D now. There's a fundamental artistry in like how to arrange compositions and where to leave rest and where to put texture and where to remove texture. And that's, of course, a more nuanced art thing, and it's a harder thing to teach. But actually, I am coming out with a bunch of short YouTube videos that are where I interviewed my own artists that I work with and asked them how they did specific pieces for The Last of Us 2. And they're not going to be deep dives into how to learn Blender. You're going to have to learn Blender on your own or glean what you can from the video. But they're just going to be me literally asking questions I don't know the answer to. Like, How the hell did you do that Ivy? And they're like, oh, there's a program called Ivy Generator. Look, what are you talking about? Yeah, there's a standalone program that's free that's called Ivy Generator, and it creates procedural Ivy. And that's how I did this Ivy. And they're like, well, how did you do that Ivy? And they're like, oh, that's a photo of Ivy. And you're like, what? And then the whole image looks exactly like it was all, done with the same technique.
Right.
These little videos that we're going to start releasing really soon, and as the game comes out, I think they're going to be these little story kind of vignettes where I just sit down with an artist and we just get into it for like 20 minutes to 30 minutes on a single image. And I think that's going to be really eye-opening for people in terms of what the process is and what the process is like in modern times.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's not a lot of... I say there's not a lot of... There's probably is. Just speaking, I just actually bought a course from Jan Urschel the other day about, some of his stuff he does in Blender. And I know, Yama, a couple of those guys have done stuff. So it is more commonplace now for Blender to be used for concepting. But I think that's also something because it's relatively... Because Blender itself, the tool we use now, is relatively new in the sense that, 2.7, whatever was the life-changing version that only came out maybe like a year ago or something. So for a lot of people, they are still like catching up at the back of it and trying to figure out all the little buttons and what they do. So it's great, I feel, for like a lot of pre-comp shots and stuff for concept. But like you said, that stuff doesn't overly replace or just automatically make your stuff good. You still need a fundamental foundation in art that tells you how pictures should be, like you said, composition, areas of rest, all that kind of stuff. So I think what it does is it allows production artists who already have those essential basics down to then make their workflow, their pipeline exponentially quicker. So rather than having a perspective light, that's all done for you.
Yes, and there's also a double risk that happens when you're using 3D, is the 3D looks so realized that it slows down your creative thinking. Like the tool affects your art in such a dramatic way. I remember back when we were doing outdoor painting, we were using brushes in Photoshop. And sometimes when you would paint outdoors, you would, by default, your battery when it was unplugged would be in low power mode. Now, when it's in low power mode, a subtle thing you don't know is that the processor is using a little bit less juice because the CPU uses quite a bit of battery to run full power.
Right.
The processor was using less juice in low power mode. You're painting outside. You make a stroke in Photoshop with a brush, and it takes a second to update. Just a 1 second.
Right.
Now, you cannot fucking paint at all because when the juice, the amorphous word that we've talked about, it's just like how to sell. When the juice is coming out of you, it cannot come out of you if you have to wait a second after every brush stroke. What happens is you make a brush stroke, and then you make another one and nothing happens, you get frustrated. You make another one, if it doesn't happen, you get frustrated. You make a third one, it happens. But now you forgot, you lost your rhythm. It's like a dance where you can only do one step at a time. You can't dance. You can take steps, but you can't dance. And so 3D tends to do that to people because it's much slower than a brush stroke. So if you're not fluent in it, if you put a bunch of cubes around, if your graphics card is slow, that will ruin your life. Like if you have a too slow computer with a too slow graphics card and it's not updating fast enough, you can easily get bogged down. And now instead of just kind of trying a bunch of different compositions, you're like building this house of cards that you don't want to mess up. And whatever you kind of have is what you decide you like instead of like trying a bunch of things. And so the huge mental chasm to cross when you're using 3D is get a render that kind of is there, take it into Photoshop and just break that mother. Just fucking draw on top, change shapes, have freedom, and on one layer, have that freedom to work on top of that 3D because the 3D can be suffocating. Because just like the brush thing, it's too slow. And even within Blender, because it has two renderers, it has the Eevee, which is very fast updating but doesn't look quite as good, and the Cycles, which is really slow. Sometimes you're working in EV because you want to keep that flow and that rhythm. You want to keep moving fast. You want to move the camera. You don't want to slow down. But then you kind of want to have a peek at what it looks like in cycles. So you click on cycles and you have a little peek. And you're like, oh, but what if I had this one little thing? You had one little thing and then you rotate and you're like, oh, cool. But it takes 10 seconds for it to refresh. And now you kind of stay in cycles because you really enjoy seeing the render look a little bit better. And you realize that an hour and 20 minutes later, you haven't done shit. All you've done is like move a few things around because you completely lost your mojo. So that's, I think, the danger of 3D. If you're very aware of that, the 3D can get you, but they immediately switch brain modes to be like juicing, fast, and then switch back to slow, switch back to fast. That's the thing that makes a great concept artist in the modern time, because those tools are such a different part of your brain and they need to be combined and alternated between much more quickly.
Yeah, I can imagine like the tools now are just so exponentially, and I think Blender, I think that also was a game changer more because it was free, right? It's absolutely 100% does cost absolutely fucking nothing, so it's almost like insubordinate or like irresponsible of you not to learn it because this free piece of software that does all these amazing things is sitting in front of you.
Yeah, and there's add-ons for Blender. Everyone knows that they're add-ons. They're basically little mini programs that people make that work within Blender. And so, like, one of them is called Physical Starlight, and it's just a sun program. Now, there's a sun in the thing, but it's really nice to just move a few sliders around and do the elevation and the azimuth and just have a quick sun in there. If you need a better sun that you need to work on, you can do something else. But there's Asset Sketcher. There's one called Botanique that does like ready-made trees. There's one called Scatter that has like incredible grass. And you will find, people are going to be shocked when you start seeing some of the Last of Us concepts. You see this photoreal image and you're like, how the hell did this happen? Well, yeah, the guy is a master, sure. And he found this perfect photo of mud incredibly and integrated it perfectly because he's got an incredible eye for light. And then all the trees are completely from a program,
Yep.
And you're like, what? Yeah, what? It's amazing that it's a huge amount of cheating. But then there's like 10 other places where only a master could kind of tune it perfectly. So and here's the tricky part too, is the people that are masters of art don't want to cheat. They want to do it the traditional way. So to have that combination of human being that has incredible skill, but has no problem at all having their skills be completely obsolete at any moment, as soon as a new thing happens that is better than their skills, they're like, no one needs that skill. Fuck that skill. Trees from an auto-generated tree thing, fucking done. Now I don't do trees anymore. I could do, but I learned them. I drew a lot of trees. I could perfectly design trees, but fuck it. I'm going to focus my energy on just the areas where I need to. That's the mark of like a modern badass, what I would call SEAL Team 6 concept artist.
Yeah, and I definitely find that that's worldly exclusively sometimes to the AAA space, to especially realistic games, so stuff like Last of Us. But then if you're doing super stylized stuff or you're working on like a cartoon or animation, then of course traditional skills in some part will play more of an emphasis in those things. So yeah, I think it just depends on per project, because you also do stylized stuff, right? You also do stuff for animations.
Oh, absolutely. And actually that's what I love the most. Mainly because I need to find my own lane, because how am I going to compete with those Last of Us artists? I'm not going to kill myself. But yes, I
got into Mischief. I was going to say I got into Mischief Painter just because you mentioned it one time.
Which one?
Was it Mischief? The one you can kind of infinitely has the infinite canvas, the painter program.
Oh right, yeah.
Is that something you don't use anymore? Or?
Well, with animation stylized stuff, again, we're trying to ruin art by trying to find 3D ways to ruin art, and in the animation space, it's no different. And we've found a lot of good ways to ruin art, like the cartoony stylized drawing style artists that know how to draw really well, draw. That is a very difficult skill, and it's probably the hardest and most rarefied skill to get someone who's really good, because it's much easier to get a couple items in Blender, put a nice render on, and it's going to look pleasing to the eyeballs. But a drawing, if it's a little bit off, doesn't look good. If it's not well constructed, doesn't look good. And you need knowledge of shape and form, and you need a lot of experience drawing. So absolutely, line drawing, design of characters. We have a couple artists that are really good at that. That's a really difficult thing. Whereas like on Last of Us work, if there was a guy who was gone or he didn't finish the image, I could give it to someone else and they could finish it.
Right.
The line drawing of characters is still probably the most traditional skill that we have that is really hard to find. But I will say, past cell shading, like you have let's say you have that cartoony character, and you do like a flat color sort of cell shading look. As soon as you're going to render it past that point, in my opinion, we go to ZBrush. Because it's so easy. In fact, for the new IP I'm working on now, I kind of created a pipeline that I decided I want. And that's the great thing about me learning the technology, is that I learned a couple of the technology things, and I'm like, no one's ever done this. Let me see if I can do it. Which was to take a model from DAZ, D-A-Z, which is a ready-made program that has ready-made posed characters, and you can pose them however you want. Or you can export them into Blender, and they still have a skeleton and a rig, so you can still pose them however you want. And in DAZ, there was a couple sliders, and there was a couple packs you could buy that were like stylization packs. And they were not very good. There's one called Morpheus, and it was okay, but you could start to stylize the character a little bit. But it was based on a drawing, because the drawing is I drew the drawing, but you needed to have a drawing to know where you're even going. Stylized it a little bit in DAZ, took it into Blender, and then sculpted it in Blender, which meant now I got to learn the sculpting tools, and I need to learn Blender, and I need to know how skeletons work, and I need to be able to move the rig around. So talking about like weeks, month maybe of like dealing with bullshit, figuring out what the right process to export it. When you export it, some things don't come through properly. It's just a mess. A lot of technical bullshit. But at the end, my goal was to say, can I have my own character designs in 3D, fully rigged, pretty good, so that I could pose them and create story frames, so that I didn't have to redraw the character, and I could have them very well realized in 3D. And I figured it out, and so now that's what I'm kind of doing. But it took like 2 months of just bullshit. When the character is done, by the way, being sculpted, it goes into Marvelous Designer, which is a program for designing clothes. And you can cut out the seams of the shirt, the pattern, as if you're a seamstress, put it on the character, and then do a simulation, and it drops onto the character. And it's like, is that even necessary, or can you do it in Blender, or should you do it in Marvelous? And then Marvelous isn't good with very hard surface things, so if there's a belt buckle or something, you got to go back into Blender and do that, or maybe you can do that in Photoshop. So like figuring out between these 4 programs, what is the fastest way for each one of those things to help, just so I can do the simple thing of creating quick story frames, required a not very quick process of months of learning a bunch of stuff. Now, there's no way I would have done that if I didn't, if I wasn't around people all the time that are doing all this stuff, because it's such an expensive time. It would much easier just be like, why don't you just draw it? Okay, let's just draw it. But that's how kind of concept art is you got these few outliers, and I'm not normally an outlier. Normally, I'm just following someone's footsteps. But you got people climbing this Mount Everest, right? And they're going higher and higher, and sometimes they don't go the right way, so they have to come back down and go another way. And then once they figure out the right way to go, then I just follow where they went. I'm rarely on the front line, because they're spending 5 times as much time figuring out the right way up. Now, on this one thing about creating story frame characters, I did do all the exploring myself. But the really good artists, they're kind of always doing that. They're spending their time constantly trying new things, new software, new stuff, new techniques. Is it IvyGen? Did Blender come out with an IvyGen? Is there a new IvyGen? This is new IvyGen add-on that existed. There's 4 ways to do Ivy. Well, it's kind of tempting to be like, well, just use a photo. Why am I doing all the work? But that hunger for whatever the newest thing is kind of like the way things are now.
Yeah, I think it's a way where sometimes even traditionally, if you were just, say, an oil painter or a canvas painter, once you had your paints that you liked, maybe it was oils or acrylics or whatever you were using, and you had the brushes, you had the canvases you like, even though you were maybe trying to build that core skill of how to paint people, how to draw things, you weren't really like, wondering about the next new technology or something else that's came out. And then, there's guys I know who just like will religiously stick to pen and paper, to ink and drawing, or depending on your craft, obviously that can be relevant, because, a lot of comic artists, maybe some will pose in 3D, some won't, and some guys, but even like, people I admire, like TB Choi, who I met at Lightbox, like her character development skills are incredible, but she's a very traditional type of person where like her entire world is pen and paper, chalk and board, or just working in Photoshop for digital stuff. And I
just Facebooked her just so I could see. Oh yeah, those are awesome. That's beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, Choi's, yeah. I mean, from South Korea, was an anatomy teacher across there, and now I think she's in LA working. I think she does a lot of stuff now for Riot, for character skins, for character development. Yeah. But one of the best in the world, and yeah, like her skills were completely honed on sitting in front of a book or a stacks of paper 5, 6, 7 hours a day, like Kim Jong-ji as well, and just honed that skill completely 100% until it was almost perfection. So yeah I think
and that's the one area that's interesting that you bring her up, because I'm looking at her art. It's amazing. That is the one area in which a lot of this doesn't apply. If you're doing that like Riot, if you're doing that specifically that Riot Games style, that hand painted figure look, that is almost entirely like, exactly like you said, all traditional skills. And if your goal is to be like her and work at Riot, then that's one of the few lanes which I would say, not sure Blender applies as much. I'm not sure Marvelous Designer is necessary. Maybe it is, but those artists, they tend to have this hand-drawn look for everything, and that's what makes them so cool. So for those people, she's got some really stylized stuff that's amazing too.
Oh yeah, she's one of a kind. She was at Lightbox displaying at that time. She had a booth. She was selling stuff like her books and stuff. But I cornered onto her early on through streaming, because she was on Twitch so much. Originally what she was doing was teaching life drawing online, because she'd done it within South Korea, but then she wanted to go online and reach other people. But then eventually, of course, because her stuff was so good, guys from LA were contacting her. They were trying to get her over. They were doing workshops with her. She would go to Blizzard and teach for a day, or come up to like a brainstorm and teach as well. And then the more and more she got popular, just the offers started coming. And now I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100%, but I'm sure she's just moved to Los Angeles, because I think she did get some kind of work offer from Riot, and now she's doing other things. But yeah, she's one of the people that is, like you said, like the outliers who are just so good at the craft that people are just, and she only, she can definitely draw backgrounds and stuff, but like most of her work on ArtStation, especially if you explore it, is just characters in white backgrounds, but her characters are so well developed, and she has such an understanding for characters that it's almost like the specialist versus the generalization thing is what I'm kind of getting into.
Yeah, and I think you follow what your thing is that you really like, and I think in this case, if you really like, and I think when I was starting out a little bit in my career, if I'd have seen her stuff, and there were people that did stuff that's the kind of this style, that was kind of more my jam. Yeah,
because you thought you were going to work in Jack and Daxter, right?
Exactly. That was totally my thing. It was more that than working on something realistic. A lot of these techniques were born out of necessity to make the game look more and more realistic. But that's not necessarily the best way, the good way to do it. You might want to have it look all really hand painterly. I enjoy stylized shapes. I love that. But I love seeing a finish that has some real materials. I like seeing the different materials. I like telling that the fabric's fabric. And even if it's a stylized way of making that material, I like seeing all the different materials in the actual thing. Like kind of how our movies are, but Spider-Verse did a really good job of it. Or the most incredible example is The Witness, that incredible short that Alberto Miegla made for Robots, where it was, I think that's, and Klaus as well. I think those two, The Witness, Klaus, the movie on Netflix that was made by those guys at SPA, Sergio Pablo, and the Spider-Verse movie. Those are three fantastic examples of the art style really making it all the way through to the final thing.
Yes.
Now, they use quite a bit of figuring it out with technology, but I'm really excited about style if it's going to make it to the final thing. So as concept artists, we've gotten calls a few times to be like, can you give us some concept art of this character? And I say, yeah, well, it's gonna look like for example, let's say they asked for a Navy SEAL. I'd be like, well, it's going to look exactly like a Navy, it's going to look photographic like a Navy SEAL. And I've gotten a few times requests, well, can you make it look like concept art so that we can look at it as concept art? And that's a tough one, because I'm kind of like, no. We can make it look like the thing. So whatever you decide the final thing is, concept art is at a state right now where we can pretty quickly make it look like however the final thing is. So for TP, for her stuff, the games look kind of like that, right? Their textures are hand painted, so that's a perfect style for that. I kind of of the mind that now in concept art, there's so many shortcuts, so many tricks. Just make it look like the final thing if you can, and use whatever technology you can. So if you want to look like a Pixar movie, it's not that hard to make concept art look like a Pixar movie. And then we can decide at that level, because that's the point of concept art. What's it literally exactly going to fucking look like? So let's do that. There's still a little bit of mythology around concept art that that their sketches, we need to see a bunch of loose stuff and then we'll refine it. Well, if someone wanted a really good gray square Would you draw it and shade it, or would you just take a screen grab of the gray square that shows up in Blender? Like, you want a gray square, right? And it's going to be in 3D at the end? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have your solution right now. It took 1 second. No, we want to see some sketches of the square first, and we want to see it shaded. Okay, is the final thing going to be a shaded sketch square? Because in that case, that makes sense. No, it's going to be 3D. Okay, well, then just look at the fucking 3D square, and it's colored. There's no reason to draw it if the technology can make it instantly look how it's supposed to look. Now, if you want to be a visionary and say, no, we want our game to have a unique look, well, then be a goddamn visionary. Like pick an art style from the shelf, whatever one you like, because there's plenty that exist. Pick one, because there's also like a little bit of mythology of like, we're going to do a bunch of concept art and we're going to find the style. No, you're not. There's enough stuff. Just pick a style that you think is good. Or pick a style that's 99% of the way there. Or say, listen, that's kind of a mythology, I think, sometimes in people's minds, that the thing we're doing has never been done ever. There's no style on earth that's even close. We're going to find it by doing concept art. No, we're just going to spend your money. So if you were to just find the thing that you want it to be most close to, and you actually have a vision of how you want it to be slightly different than that, or you have a completely unique style that you have in your mind, say what that is. It's rare that there's a completely unique style on Earth, but like, okay, let's say there is one, like Alberto Miegelo's. Then find that one thing and then go for that exact mark. I think that's much more realistic than hoping that through a lot of different iteration and doodles, you're going to find a style, because a style is a very known quantity, and a lot of styles exist, and you can kind of point to the North Star and just move towards it. And that's what we've found. It's so much more efficient.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you say, there's almost two strands or two schools of thought that, the stylized stuff or the stuff Troy's doing is unique, because then, if you're drawing stuff, then you are drawing stuff. But then the Last of Us stuff, because you want it to look almost like a finished game cell or something that would be an engine, you have to push the technology because you want that stuff to look like it belongs in the game. So, I think there's definitely paths you can take up the mountain, as you once said, with the increase in awesomeness. But I think you have to probably decide early on which one you're going to follow, because one, in essence, both are hard to accomplish, but they definitely have different focuses altogether, right?
Yes, and also I will say that that Alex Neonakis, she does a lot of art for Last of Us too. She designed characters, and she does them hand drawn like this, and so did some of the other artists there. They did a lot of art that looks a lot like her art, hand-drawn stuff that kind of, like you were talking about that drawing of Joel and Ellie where they're laughing by the campfire.
Right.
Like a beautiful drawing that had a beautiful feel, that gave a mood. But you can see that is a little bit tenuous to even say that that's concept art, because it wasn't for production or anyone to do a thing. It was just to be inspired by it. And you're saying the actor was inspired by it, because also people love looking at drawings. It feels tactile, it feels hand drawn, and they understand how it was made. So looking at that Ellie Joel drawing gave people an emotional response. It wasn't like information for the modelers how to model Joel's shirt. It was, here's a feeling that we can keep in our mind when we think about these characters. So it kind of also depends a little bit on like, why are you doing. And we don't get hired as often for that. We get hired more into like, what does this damn thing look like? So, but I think there's definitely room for that sort of beautiful art for art's sake to give a feeling.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like that's exactly what you're trying to get across, is that those things aren't built for production. It's more just like, and I think for Troy, that's probably was the first time he actually saw what Joel was going to look like realistically, like what he was going to be head to toe be wearing, how he was going to be interacting with Ellie, and I think that was a conversation starter, right? That's what a lot of concept art is usually a good thing for, is starting that conversation of, well, what do these buildings really look like? How does that thing in the distance work? Are they going to be using that? So I think that's almost the job, right? It's not just storytelling, it's starting a conversation for design, concept design even, and how things are fleshed out in the game.
Totally. And I think if you're in-house and there's a little bit of room where we don't know what the game is yet, that's a perfect time to have those kinds of conversation starters. We get hired to end conversations. More than start them. Where we get hired to like say, we don't know what this should be. We're going to pay you to like tell us what you think it should be in the end. But yes, there's absolutely some room for that, and I would love to get hired to do more, figuring stuff out like that. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely on the pre-production side, I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on internally before they probably reach out to you and we're like, right now, this is your
right. They're not going to be like, hey, we have a bunch of money we want to spend and we don't know what we want, so we're just going to give you this money and you try stuff and it doesn't matter what. But But if you're in-house at a studio and they're like, hey, we have 2 weeks and we really don't know what we're going to do next, how about try this because you're already on payroll?
Right.
That's different,
Makes a lot of sense.
It's unlikely that we're going to get freedom like that, because why would they call us to give us money when they don't know what they want?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, I think that's a great note to end on, Shaddy. I think we've covered a lot of bases in this talk today, and I definitely feel like I'm more educated, and I hope my viewers and listeners are. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on and talking to us. It was an absolute honor to have you and to listen to your thoughts in the industry. It was definitely more enthusiastic and more over the top than I thought it was going to be, but I love every minute of it. Every minute.
A lot, man. I appreciate it. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you guys have any questions for Shaddy, just leave them down below as per. I'm going to leave all his details below as well for One Pixel Brush and for Shaddy himself. If you have any questions, you can reach out. And of course, Last of Us 2 will be hitting, landing on PS4 in a couple of days. I think at this point it is only a couple of days away. And
Friday. And I think Thursday night at some time, maybe you can even download it if you already have it pre-downloaded and purchased.
The midnight launch, yes. So yeah, definitely. If you guys enjoy the game, or want to give some feedback, well, maybe no feedback about the game, but if you enjoyed it and you're an artist and you want to maybe talk about the art, then of course,
Artbook is on Amazon right now. You can order that book. I think it starts shipping on the 23rd. And all the One Pixel Brush artists, it says their name and it says at OPB. So you'll be able to see in the book which artists that I worked on that game, and there's a lot of their art in that art book. So.
Yeah, I mean, I saw even I think there's a limited edition version of the book as well that has like some prints and stuff in it. So I definitely am going to be
grabbing the $80 one and the $27 one, I think. So the $80 one is like limited edition, and then the $27 one I think is similar. It has all the same art, maybe. So get the lead cheaper.
Plenty out there. So, but yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything you want to ask below, just make sure you check out on YouTube. This is usually where we're most active. Of course, you'll find us on different podcast services and Spotify, stuff like that. And yeah, again, thanks to Shaddy for coming on. Thanks to you guys for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes coming up as we go on. There's a lot happening. And then, we'll just speak to you guys later. Thanks for tuning in, and see you guys later.
Bye.